So this generation specifically doesn't have a lot of understanding about money up until now. And even if they do, they might have a lot of debt. They might still feel like they have a message of I'm bad with money. I hear that a lot
Hmm.
in financial therapy. And so to do their own work helps them then have conversations with their loved ones, whether that's a partner, a spouse, fiance, or family. And we actually try and have them do what we call money dates, where they set aside a little bit of time to sit
Mm.
down and talk about this. Because if you just bring it up in the car or while someone's washing the dishes, this can create a fight because that person feels ambushed. Like, I'm not ready. I need to like mentally prepare for this. I need a time and a date and a space.
Yes. I feel like am I in a session right now?
Just getting all the tidbits,
Yeah, no, that's amazing. Hey, so on today's show we have Khara. Khara, do you want to give us a little bit of information about you? Kind of give us your bio, your background, and then we can dive right into the show about wedding finances, really.
Yeah, absolutely. So my name's Khara Croswaite Brindle. I'm a serial entrepreneur. So I wear lots of different hats. The one we're going to talk most about today, I believe, is the financial therapist hat. So I'm one of 30 trained certified financial therapists in the US right now. It's kind of an up and coming designation that blends like mental health work with financial work. So my role is to help people have a better relationship with their money, whether it's guilt, shame, debt, all sorts of things. It's really fascinating and I love it. In addition to that, I have a mental health practice here in Denver, Colorado. I'm a mom of a 14-month-old. I'm a professor. I'm working on my seventh book that I'm writing right
Seven?
now. Yeah.
Did you say seven?
Yep.
Oh my
Yeah.
gosh. Okay. Okay. Wow. We need
So
to.
I'm never bored. Yeah.
Wow. Okay. What's the most recent or the most recent book you've published?
We launched a gluten-free cookbook as a family endeavor back in January. So that was really fun. Creative energy that I had on maternity leave, actually. I was like, I'll do something fun. I need to still feel like I'm producing because I am a former workaholic. So that was my adjustment. And so we put out a high altitude gluten free dessert cookbook, which is all the family
Wow.
recipes that we've loved for years that are now gluten free because I've been gluten free since late 2020.
Oh my gosh. Amazing. But I want to hear about this perfectionism book as well.
Yeah. Yeah. So that one became an Amazon bestseller in early 2021. I wrote it early in 2020 before the pandemic hit, and then continued to write because we all had lots of time all of a sudden that we didn't have. So I launched that in July of 2020. And it was basically all the skills I've been teaching my clients as a mental health therapist to have better work life balance, which now is like a huge buzzword. And I would actually say work life flow now
Yeah.
versus balance. But I was like, how do I help these driven entrepreneurs who have no time, who don't want to do something for more than 5, 10 minutes at a time to feel better? And so I put in 22 skills into a book and said, here are the things I'm teaching people one on one. And it was really well received. It was probably pretty well timed with the pandemic and all.
Yeah. Good. And tell us the name of that book.
Perfectioner from workaholic to well balanced.
So good. Well, I would love to dive into our episode today about just wedding finances. And I think that finances in general, especially when we're talking about weddings, is something that people, it's kind of it's a buzzkill.
Mhm.
Maybe a little bit like nobody really wants to talk about it, but it usually, in my experience, creates the most stress from an event. So I think the first question I would have for you, and I'd love this just to kind of go anyway. I mean, we probably could talk for hours and hours about this, but
Right.
uh, I mean, the first thing, where's your money going to come from for your planning?
Yeah, I mean, I think the first thought I have is this is why people usually, as a couple, talk to their partner about a wedding because it does take a little bit of planning, right? Whether it's finding this optimal vendor that you wanted to use or having enough money saved. So I always get a little skeptical when I see people on like those shows who are like, I had no idea it was coming. Oh my gosh, I'm so surprised. I'm like, that actually could be like a warning sign financially
Yeah.
that you don't know where that's going to go. So a lot of people, if they're if they have family that are willing to contribute, that's one thing. I think a lot of modern couples also try to save. And
Mhm.
so then they start to look at what their priorities are based on what is our budget? What is our optimal number that we are like, I'm comfortable spending this, but not exceeding that number. So something to know about the financial therapy realm is that all the decisions we make are very much about emotions. They're emotionally driven. They're not
Yes.
actually logic of like, I need $26,000 for a wedding. It's, I want to have this photographer because I've been following them on Instagram. I want this person because this had amazing food at a wedding I was at. And so it's a lot more emotional than people realize until
Mhm.
they start to like dive into this, like we are today, this conversation.
Yeah. So when kind of talking about this, do you suggest that people actually not be emotional, or what's like the suggestion about that? I mean, because obviously weddings are emotional. It's not like a event where you don't want to have emotion. That'd be pretty boring. So
Mhm.
there's no point in having a wedding in some cases if it's not going to have some level of emotion. Ideally, it's joy and happiness and all of those things. But should you try to take finances and be unemotional about them, or what's the how do we go about that?
I think a lot of people listening would be like, how, yes, I want that. How do I
Yeah,
have that?
yeah,
And it's just not realistic, right? So most of us, a number has a comfort level. So it's like I'm okay with $100 on this bill, but if it's 110, I'm not okay. Same with like savings accounts and checking accounts. Like I want to see a certain number in here, and when it goes too low, as in the checking account, or it doesn't go high enough, as in a savings account, we start to have a reaction, an emotional reaction to that.
mhm.
And everyone's number is different. I've asked every single client I've ever worked with, "What's your number?" And I've never had the same exact number for two people.
Are these numbers random numbers that people make up? I do this.
Based
I
on,
mean,
yeah, I
I'm
mean,
just thinking
sometimes
about
it
it right
is like
now. It's
out of
like,
the blue.
yeah,
Yeah, so sometimes it's like, "This sounds good." That's usually how it's, delivered, is, "This sounds good to me," or they're used to seeing a certain number in their account, and when it goes below that number, they start to get really nervous.
okay,
So it could be, for some people, it might be, I have $100 in my account, and I'm okay with that, but if I go low, then all of a sudden I have, like, negative $35 in the account.
right,
And then I have clients who that would like make them have a panic attack. They want like $2,000 in their account or $10,000. It just depends on what they do for a
right,
living and what their values are. But for so many people, that shows up in wedding planning too. Of like, I'm okay with spending X amount on this thing for a wedding, but if it's too high, quote unquote, for them, they have a reaction, and then they might start having a conflict with their partner or a family member who's
hmm,
trying to convince them to use that vendor, for example.
yeah. I mean, looking back on my wedding planning, I made up $15,000. I'm in the wedding industry, and I just like, this feels good, and it was totally
Exactly.
unrealistic. It was unrealistic, and so yeah, I just like pulled out something out of the air and like, no, this is what it is. And then when it exceeded that, it felt really uncomfortable.
Yes, exactly. And so I think a lot of people, obviously, Google is our friend this way, where we might Google what's the average amount of a wedding. I don't have the new numbers, maybe you do, but the old number before the pandemic was the average wedding was about $26,000. And so we
It's
saw
about
people who
30
did,
now. Yeah.
okay. So we had people who would just like bootstrap it all together, and it was like really minimal costs. Maybe they did eloped or something like that, versus like $100,000 weddings, right? So like
Mm.
26, now 30,000 is the middle ground. And so a lot of people, if they came across that number, they might then make an emotional attachment to that and start working with that as their baseline, just
Yeah.
because that's what they know. They don't know anything different.
Right. And I think that that's one thing I'm in the wedding industry, and I do find that it's really, people just don't even know where to start. So
Mhm.
do you feel like we could kind of go down that path of where to start? I mean, there's a lot of awkward conversations potentially. You don't have to make them awkward, right? But like, you're going to have to talk to your partner about money. You're going to have to talk to
Mhm.
your family about money. You're going to have to talk to your family about who they can invite because of money. Like,
Yes,
and so
100%.
let's go down that road a little bit.
Yeah, so I think if we start with this like major number of like this is the overall cost of the event, then a lot of people start to look at like the ratios. So they might say, okay, here are my top three priorities. I want really
Mm,
good food. I want a phenomenal photographer. I want fresh flowers, right? We know that those things cost money.
right.
And so those might be at the top of the list where it's like, okay, of this $30,000 I have as a goal, I want a third of that to be towards food or a photographer or whatnot. And so I think once people have a baseline, they can kind of see how that sits with them to say, okay, when this vendor says I'm $6,000, how does that land for the couple?
Hmm.
For this other vendor saying, I will do this, but also give you a discount, does that land differently? So I think having that big number first, kind of like you did in your own experience,
Hmm.
sets the tone before we make decisions on vendors or any priority.
Yeah. Okay. How about talking with those family, those relationships, and dealing with that murkiness? And if you've never really
Yeah.
talked about finances much in the past, this is like your first introduction into talking about money. I mean, ideally, you're talking to your partner about money prior to this,
Hmm.
but you might have different needs and wants or expectations from your wedding day and different priorities, and there's going to probably be conflict. And the same thing with your families, if they're contributing or if they're involved in any way. Can you help us navigate that?
Yeah, so you've really hit the nail on the head, which is talking about money is uncomfortable, which is why
Mhm.
people come to therapy to practice this first. The running joke in our industry is that people would rather talk about their sex lives than their money lives. It's that strained and shame filled or
Yeah.
uncomfortable. So
Why?
for a lot of people,
Why?
why?
Yeah.
Because it causes fights, like you said. I mean, all of us have beliefs about money.
Mhm.
Everything from money is opportunity and money is power to money is corrupt and money is evil, right? Kind of on the
Mhm.
spectrum
Mhm.
of beliefs. And so, depending on how we were raised and what was modeled for us by our family, our loved ones, a lot of families just never talked about money. And if they did, it was,
Yeah.
oh my gosh, we don't have enough money, or you can't have that, we can't afford that,
Right.
or don't be selfish, you don't need that, right? It's like negative messages.
Uh-huh.
Mm.
I'm taking notes because I got my family, and now I'm like, oh, I definitely have said some of those things. You know what I mean?
Yes, we all
Uh,
have, and we're of a generation that was raised on like Disney movies. So I'm talking to like the millennial generation
yeah.
right now, of like the 30 to 40 somethings. And Disney movies actually reinforce some of our worst money beliefs. I mean,
Really?
think about it. When you think of like the most popular Disney movies with like the princesses and
Right.
the villains always had power. They always had the money. And so the message is the person with power and money is bad or evil
Right.
or corrupt, that you should do this all for free or be a martyr or not even think about money, be carefree. And so, one of our biggest significant characters is Scrooge, right? Hoarding his money, saying, like,
Mhm.
this is what I
Mhm.
do with money. And he's a miserable human being, or that's how he's conveyed at first.
Yeah.
So this generation specifically doesn't have a lot of understanding about money up until now. And even if they do, they might have a lot of debt. They might still feel like they have a message of, I'm bad with money. I hear that a lot
Mhm.
in financial therapy. And so to do their own work helps them then have conversations with their loved ones, whether that's a partner, a spouse, fiance, or family. And we actually try and have them do what we call money dates, where they set aside a little bit of time to sit
Mm.
down and talk about this. Because if you just bring it up in the car or while someone's washing the dishes, this can create a fight because that person feels ambushed. Like, I'm not ready. I need to like mentally prepare for this. I need a time and a date and a space.
Yes. I feel like, am I in a session right now?
Just getting all the tidbits,
Yeah. No, no, that's amazing. Sorry, I totally got you off track though when we were talking about kind of how to start those conversations. Like you were kind of giving those tips about money dates.
Yeah, yeah. So money dates is something for people to consider. I really have them break it down into like what's going to be the most comfortable environment for the conversation. Is it in the car, but you're sitting in the car, right? Like, no, not one person's trying to drive and focus on this
Right.
really deep conversation. That's never going to work well. Is it okay? We're going to do this after the kids are in bed, or we're going to do this by scheduling a time on a Saturday morning when the kids are being watched by grandparents. Just like having to be really intentional. So it's not
Mhm.
like I just dropped this bomb on you and then you
Right.
have a understandable reaction of, I don't want to talk about this, right? Like, I'm uncomfortable. Why would I want to talk about this? So getting some buy-in for the money date. When it comes to family, starting to think about what's their number, right? So I was fortunate enough to have families say, like, we do want to contribute to a wedding. Here's what we can contribute. So they were upfront. This is the number we can contribute.
Right.
Okay, well, that's basically a budget in and of itself, saying like, you have this much that you can
Right.
use towards whatever, which was very thoughtful and I was really appreciative. And out of respect for that family member or family members, I was going to be like, I'm not going to exceed that or expect them to pay more.
Right.
So then all of a sudden it becomes like this fun little game of Tetris of like, where does everything fit? What do I want them to pay for? What am I paying for? What do I need to save? Everything that you've alluded to so far in this conversation. It's complex. It's not just a one and done.
Yes. And actually, in your particular situation, it sounded like they just said, here is the funds, do what you want. But that's not always the case either, right? It might be, here is the funds, but you have to hire this vendor, or
Mhm.
you have to have that conversation with those that are giving you funds about their expectations as well.
Yeah,
Because
absolutely.
in my experience, oftentimes it might be very easy in the beginning, like if you're planning for a year, and then, a couple months before the event, there starts to create some like discomfort again, like, oh, maybe some control from whoever's
Mhm.
funding as well. So I think making clear conversations ahead of time and having those conversations about expectations is also really important.
Yes, and you've alluded to something that happens anytime we borrow money from family. I mean, this was a
Mm,
gift, but, like, this is that borrowing mentality of, like, I expect something for what I've given you, right? So, like, if
hmm.
maybe not even malicious, it might just be like, I expect fresh flowers because I've always envisioned you having fresh flowers at your wedding, and I love you, right? Versus someone saying, I've given you 5 grand and I expect really good food. You better feed me at your wedding.
Right.
So each person has some expectations,
But you
and
might not know what those
I
are. You have to
yeah, if you don't
ask.
ask, right? And so, whether your family's really hands off, like, here's the money, do you? I mean, I feel like that's one end of this versus
Hmm.
maybe they want to be a part of every single detail. And is your fiance okay with that? Are you okay
Oh
with that? Like,
gosh.
being on the same page with as a couple probably matters first and foremost before you tackle family gifts.
Oh boy. I didn't even think about the element of what if your partner's family members are contributing a certain amount and then your family members are contributing a certain amount, and this is a wonderful situation, folks. Like, a lot of our couples, for instance, pay for their wedding themselves, so this is like a really great situation where family could potentially want to contribute, but that's sticky too. Goodness.
Hmm. Yep. Yeah, like, how do we make sure everyone's happy? Especially because I know that, like, weddings are more about the family and friends than it is about the
Yes.
couple, which sounds so weird to say out loud, but, like,
Yeah.
we know you and I know this 'cause we've worked with people who've
Yeah.
gone through the wedding process. How do we make them happy? How do they get what they want? How many people do they get to invite? You mentioned that earlier, like,
Yeah.
how do we restrict the guest list when they're like, "I want all of my friends here because this is about me as much as it is about you."
Yes. Weddings are funny.
It's a big
It,
deal, yep.
they are a really big deal, and these are the things that, you don't see a lot of information on blogs, and some of, like, weddings are beautiful. Don't get me wrong. And they're visually very appealing. And it is truly about, like, in our case, we focus on, the love of a couple and the connection with the couple. But I do think that it adds so much more stress when you don't bring some of these financial questions to the table right at the beginning.
Mhm.
And so that's why that we're having this conversation, because I feel very passionate about it. And one of our models in our company is to encourage people not to go into financial debt over their wedding day. So I don't know if you have any thoughts on, you know, I guess it's everybody's decision is their own, but on how to maintain that budget or set that budget and stick with it, and how to have those conversations.
Yeah, I mean, I think before we jump into the budget conversation, another thought I had is for couples to go to other people's weddings or watch them
Yes.
on shows or movies and just notice what shows up. So for myself and my now husband, I would after a wedding be like, "What did you like about that wedding? What did you think was really cool or
Mm,
fun, or what did you enjoy as a guest? And what would you want if this was our wedding?" So, like, we had lots of conversations about we like this, we would do this differently, and that really helped us feel more prepared for a budget conversation because we already knew,
yeah.
like, oh, we want really good food because we both want to make sure they're fed and happy. I mean, my husband's a foodie, so, like, that was like non-negotiable. Versus, like, flowers, we didn't need a ton of them. Like, some people are like, I want flowers everywhere, but I knew how expensive flowers could be. And I was like, I'd rather have that for like a DJ or something
Right.
else. So by having couples experience other weddings, even if they're not like going as a guest to a live wedding, which I know is a little bit more limited in the pandemic and now differently after the fact, can they watch a show or watch a movie where there's a wedding portrayed and just like, notice what shows up? They're like, heck yeah, I want this. Or like, oh my gosh, I would never want that. That sounds awful. And start like making mental lists of like, here are the things that are priorities. Here are the things we would toss. And that can help start the conversation when it's their time and they've gotten engaged and they're ready to plan. So I wanted to throw that in there. From the financial therapy realm, budget is a bad word. We actually
Okay.
don't
Okay.
like budgets.
Let's talk about a better word.
Yeah. So when you think of the word budget, most people have this heavy feeling that's associated with
Ugh.
it because
Yeah.
it's restrictive, right?
Mhm,
So it actually subscribes to what we call deprivation, just like when
mhm.
you like deprive yourself of food or water or air. It's not good. So, by no means are we saying go buck wild and spend a lot of money and go into debt. We're not about that either in this industry. However, we're going to say let's revamp a budget to something we call a spending plan. So instead of saying, here's a budget,
Mm-hmm.
which is I have $200 to spend on something, and if I exceed it, I feel awful, guilty, feel
Right.
shame. Now it's I want to save $200 for this thing. That's what I have allocated. And if I exceed that, there's no shame or negative response at all. So we have the money set aside, it's there, it's planned, it feels good. So that's the biggest shift from like budget to spending plan is like the emotional reaction to them.
Yeah.
One is very empowering, one is very depriving.
Yes. I felt even a physical sensation when he said that. Both words. I was like, oh
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah. Like most people like they sink down and their ears go, their
Yeah.
shoulders go up to their ears, like, budget. And so like that's something I always like to like when I start with new clients, I kind of shock them a little bit, be like, actually, budgets are horrible. We don't like budgets here. And they're like, oh, great. And they have this sigh of relief. I'm like, okay, we're not going to talk about budget. It's like, well, we're still going to like empower you to have the money that you need for things, but we're not going to shame you or blame you or make you feel awful if you don't meet that need. So we're just going to revamp it a little bit.
Hmm.
And people much more appreciate spending plans for that reason. It's very empowering.
I love that. So when you talk about spending plans, you did bring up the word saving for those. So do you have any advice or when you're in conversations with folks about how they save, or is there like these specific numbers, like 10% should go here and 10% should go there? And do you talk with couples about that kind of stuff? Or is that like
I mean,
more?
each couple is unique, and I
Mhm.
actually work just with individuals. So if people were going to
Oh,
work with
oh,
couples, they would definitely have more of a collaboration between the couple and the therapist. So I work mostly with small business owners, entrepreneurs, but then they come in saying, "Hey, I'm starting to plan a wedding," so it shows
yeah,
up in our work. And there's not really like a ratio of like 10% here, 10% there. I mean, there's tons of books out there that will say that of like, here's this model, here's this,
right.
I could name all these people, but I don't want to subscribe to them here on your podcast. I'm just not
Yeah.
going to name them, but you know who they are. And so instead of what we talk about is how do I get the emotional buy-in to say this is worth saving for? So it could be something as simple as I need the visual. Some people are
Hmm.
going back to like the envelope method. My sister, who was just talking about that, like, oh, put money in each of these envelopes that are
Yeah.
labeled for certain things. I personally believe in renaming a savings account on your online banking. So like you
Hmm.
log in, you see your checking, you see your savings, and now it's renamed saving for our wedding or something more emotional like wedding of our lifetime or
Right. I
whatever the
love
words
that.
are that resonate. And so when people see that, if they're checking their accounts regularly, which is a different agenda item for financial therapy when people avoid that, but let's say they are, and they see that, that reinforces this is why I'm working so hard. This is why I'm saving. And then they could do automatic payments. They could set a money date for themselves, put money over once a month. So it feels very intentional. Lots of strategies there.
Mhm.
But just the visual of what are we working towards can be really, really helpful.
Yeah, I am personally very visual. Like I am one of those people that would love to have a poster board, like just a hand-drawn poster board with a thermometer in the background, and I get to color in my,
Oh, there you go. Yep.
like very tactile and visual. So, but I can say just from my own experience too, is that my husband isn't necessarily that way. He wants to see a spreadsheet. So we
Hmm.
definitely have to like meld our little worlds with, financial planning too. So that's a perfect example of like everybody's a little bit different, and how they want to see things and stuff like that. So yeah, so when it comes to what you do, because personally I've never talked to a financial therapist and I just love this. It's so good. And like I'm like, "Oh gosh, what a wonderful area that you're in." And I think it's so valuable for so many people. So one, I want to thank you for being in this space, but it's all about emotions, it sounds like.
Hmm. Yeah. So we have kind of three buckets in this work. When
Mhm.
people come in saying, what is this? Do I want to do this?
Yeah,
There's a
yeah.
lot of anxiety of like, what are you going to make me do? And I'm like, I'm not making you do anything, actually. Like,
Yeah.
you're here because you want to be here. What I explain to people when they come into a discovery call, which is the first touch of like, tell me what this is. Is this in alignment with my goals? I explain there's three buckets. And this is coming from Barry Tesler's work called The Art of Money. And she's
Mhm.
here in Boulder, Colorado. So she's one of the what we call the OGs of financial therapy. She was doing it before it had a name. And she talks about money healing as that first bucket. And that's what
Uh,
you and I are talking about of like, do we know our edges? Do we know what causes us to stress? What's our emotional response to too much money, not enough money? What are our beliefs about money? Are we someone who likes to spend, save, right? Like these labels that we all
yeah.
have. So we start there. And if people can do that work, then they can move into money practices, which is the spreadsheets, the apps, the tools, the books, the programs out there that help people do what they want to do. And then the last bucket is money strategies, like moving towards future money planning. So that could be like financial advisor
Mm-hmm.
collaboration. That could be, I want to retire at X age. I want a house. I want to raise a child. I want a vacation home. So that's different for each person. But like getting a sense of like they have future goals now that we've gotten rid of, or like not rid of, but healed some of those negative parts around money. They have a better relationship.
Yeah. Ugh, so good. That's, you did say that your field's fairly, like, folks in your field are fairly rare, right? Like there's not a ton of people doing financial therapy.
Yeah, it's been coined since 2010. So it's really not
Okay.
that old in like the big scheme of
Yeah.
things. It's been around before that, but it wasn't really like created with a certification or like a set standards or ethics until 2010. Now there's the certified financial therapist designation, which I hold. There's 30 of us, 30-ish of us right now. And then there's also a certified financial social worker, which is the other designation kind of building. So there are lots of people doing this work, including financial professionals coming
Right.
in and then mental health people coming in. So we've got like lots of different kinds of folks wanting to hold space for like money conversation.
That's so great. And if you don't mind, how did you transition from what you were doing before into this financial therapy realm?
Well, I was about to go through my second round of burnout professionally when the pandemic hit. We're about a year in, so 2021, and I was feeling it. I was like, there's all the warning signs again. I'd already burned out in 2017 to 18, somewhere in
Hmm.
there. I haven't actually pinpointed. I'm pretty sure it was like 2 years before I did my own work, which spurred the Perfectioner book we talked about earlier. So in 2021, I was interviewing a financial therapist for an entrepreneurial project that I was putting together. It's one of the things that kept me going, was creating things. And as soon as she started talking, I was like, oh my gosh, this is awesome. I want to do this. Because she was a mental health therapist, moved into financial therapy, was here in Colorado. I interviewed her, I sat with it, I talked to my spouse about it, and like the next week I pitched to her, can I be your mentee? Can you mentor me? Teach me what you do? I want to do this for other therapists. Because by then I've been working with a lot of other therapists. And so small business owners, therapists,
Hmm.
entrepreneurs, those are my people. And so she mentored me and I got certified by the end of the year. And the rest is kind of history.
That's so amazing. Great. Well, I'm glad that you like saw those signs for yourself. And I guess that's probably part of your field. But, like in my field, I'm a photographer by trade and I don't always have the best photos of myself, and so maybe it's like something similar. Like you talk about it and you teach it, and then all of a sudden you're like, oh my gosh, here's the signs.
Mhm.
These are
Yep,
the things
like
I
that
talk
wake
to
up
my
call.
clients about. You're my yeah, I guess clients, right?
Hmm. Yep.
Perfect. Sorry, I got a little off track there, but I was just so interested in learning about why you made this transition into financial therapy. And I know budget's a bad word, so we talked about spending plan and thinking about how to have those conversations with family members. I think that was a great area to focus on. Was there any other area that people really need to know this?
I think a lot of people are like, tell me the tools, show me the apps, give me what works,
Mm,
quote unquote, right?
first.
So I know there are lots of different tools out there. And as you and I've started to allude to, it's really about what works for each person. It's
Right.
individualized. An Excel spreadsheet works for one person, a bank statement works for another. Most of the major banks now have little graphs and pie charts saying,
Mhm.
here's what you spent your money on. And they try to guess what it is, whether it's food or clothes
Mhm.
or gas, things like that. And so I think there are more visuals now than ever, but not all those tools are like a one size fits all
Right.
model. So I have plenty of people come into financial therapy being like, I tried all those things and they didn't stick. They didn't work, or I didn't like them, or I just like sabotaged after 30 days, kind of like a diet.
Yeah, yeah.
And it's for the same reason. It's I feel deprived. I feel like the knee jerk reaction is I have to save, which means I can't spend anything anywhere. And the first two things people sacrifice when they're trying to save is social events and going out to eat.
Right.
So now we've like in some ways isolated ourselves more, made ourselves more miserable because we've said, I can't do any of the things that might be quote unquote part of my self care or keep me feeling sane because I'm supposed to be saving for this wedding. That's
Right.
$30,000. So most of us have to learn how to hold for both, where we can save for this big
Right.
thing that's down the line, maybe it's a year out,
Hmm.
while still having quality of life here and now. So is it I'm going to eat out once a week because that is a time to connect with my friends or my partner or whoever.
Right.
I'm going to do something social. We might have a spending plan on like how much that should be without feeling restricted, but we're not going to say I'm going to go buck wild and I'm going to spend all my money here and have nothing saved for the wedding.
Right.
And most people of our age group were told all you do is save. Don't spend,
Yes.
just save. So this is a shift in the mindset to be like, I can do both. I can save and I can spend, and I can do both of these in moderation to be successful.
Yeah. What if you don't save enough money?
Well, then I guess you better start going a little bit lean on your wedding if this is what we're talking about, right?
Right. And I think that
I mean,
that's real life. I think that's another like Disney thing for me. I'm like, this is real life
reality.
still. There's no Prince Charming coming to scoop you up and take you to the
Yeah.
castle. We have
I know that we
reality
have
as well.
lots of like side hustles that a lot of
Hmm.
people, if they're able bodied and not too stressed, this might be an option, but that's not true for everybody, right? Where they're like,
Hmm.
I can fit in a third job or a side hustle or do Lyft for a little while or whatever that is. I have clients who've done that. I've had clients sell one of their vehicles. They can have that money for something else, right? Like there are, I hate to say the word sacrifices, but I think that's what they feel like. Like there are things people can do to address debt or have money saved. But for most people, it's just starting to like get in the mindset of can I save and have quality of life right now so that when they are planning for something big, like buying a house or getting married or having a kid, that the money is there. Or they have a plan to start putting money to that bucket, right?
Right.
That little checking account, savings account under the mattress, wherever it is. And to be able to do all the things. And most people of our age group are just told, oh, to save, you can't spend anywhere.
Right.
It's not realistic. We can't do that. That's going to set us up to fail.
Yes, that's 100% true. Well, thank you. I'm so excited that I've been able to reconnect with you a little bit and kind of see where you're headed in your career. And congratulations on all those amazing accomplishments. Actually, one other thing I wanted to ask you about was your you probably done multiple of these too, but your TED Talk. Can you tell us what that
Mm.
was about and how we can find it?
Yeah, so the TED Talk is actually a bridge to the Perfectioner book. So I did a TED Talk in December of 2021 while 7 months pregnant. Super fun.
Ah,
Don't know how people have done that, but luckily she behaved herself and I could breathe and talk and enunciate. But I don't plan to do it that way again. So that TED Talk is called The Burden of Busyness, and it's found on YouTube as well as the TED site. And it was basically talking about how we have subscribed to a culture that's very much about the hustle, the grind, and Brene Brown talked about we wear this
mhm.
badge of busyness with courage, like it's something to have honor and pride around. It's like, no, let's not do that. So I challenged folks to think about busyness differently. Everything from a simple question of how are you, and a lot of us would respond busy.
Yes.
And I was like, oh, okay, so we're reinforcing this, right?
Mhm. Mhm.
So I talked about that, and I talked about a couple of the strategies that were in the book of like how to streamline your life and do these things that are a little bit different and see if it makes it feel like work life balance is more possible.
Yeah, work life flow, right?
Work life flow. Yes.
I
Yeah.
love it.
Back then it was balance. Now in 2023 and beyond, it's
Y-
flow. And I think a lot of people like that better because balance has this imagery of it has to be equal, right? Where it's like this much
Right.
work and this much home life. And flow fits more of the entrepreneur spirit of like I might be like really working hard on a project, launching
Mhm.
something like a podcast, like your
Right.
podcast, and then I'm going to take a little break and be present for the family. And so that would have more of a flow imagery than it's equal because it isn't.
Love that you said that because I think that that's even something that can relate to wedding planning. Like
Mhm.
that's kind of one of those things that's going to pop up and it's not going to pop up again. It's like a big project, right? And so evaluating even how much time you're going to spend per week on it or how much energy you're going to give it. If you have the funds to hire somebody to completely do it, or if you're going to go DIY, all of
Mhm.
those things are factors in your work life, wedding planning life flow. And I think that I'm so glad that you just brought that up because there's more to wedding planning than also finances. Everybody knows that. They
Right.
want to touch the frilly stuff too, but that can also cause burnout in your life that maybe you think like this is supposed to be fun, and
Right.
turns into something that's really stressful. And one of the contributors is finances, but also just like the time and energy that you have to devote to planning an event like this. And I don't want this to be a Debbie Downer podcast episode by any means. This is all like an area of hope. Like get these financial questions, as planning ideas, your balance out or your flow kind of in check as you're going through it in the beginning. And then you'll have these expectations that things ebb and flow, right? So,
Mhm. Well, yeah, even as you say it, I'm like, we got married first and we bought a house later in
mhm.
life, and both these events felt like there was a lot of urgency. Like you have to like
Yes.
lock it in like right now. And I don't think I would have had buying a house as a comparison until we bought one in 2021. Everything happened in 2021.
Uh-huh.
So it shows it was a big year. But in that middle of that like urgency of like you have to like stop what you're doing, stop your work to like get all this paperwork together, to make an offer, to close, blah 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 blah. Weddings have that same kind of urgency for folks of like lock in the photographer before they're
Right.
not available any longer, lock in the caterer, lock in all the things, find the dress, do all of it. And I felt like there was a lot of pressure at like the first 6 months of planning to like have it all figured out, even though we had a year total.
Right.
And so I see you nodding. It's like maybe that's like not even just me, but I think that urgency also makes us make decisions that are emotional, right? Of like, okay, I just have to like
It's
grab
so
this
true.
person. I'm not even sure if they're the right one, but I'm going to grab them because they might not be available next week when
Right.
I go back
A-
to them.
And I can say that some of that is true. Like the vendor may not be available, or they may be creating some sense of urgency because they have their own finances that they need to fulfill,
It's
right?
true. Hmm.
But maybe that's a good way to make sure you have a couple options and maybe communicate with those vendors a little bit like, hey, this is kind of where we're at. This is where we're comfortable with. Maybe there's a different kind of payment plan situation that everybody could
Hmm.
work in. Like you could lock in the particular vendor for maybe a different kind of payment plan just to get them, you're in their books. But I don't think there's anything wrong with communicating with your vendors, especially when it comes around finances. As long as you feel they're valuable and you want them part of your day, I think talking with them about finances is totally fine. And I don't think you should feel any sort of shame in that because weddings are expensive. And honestly, a year of planning and saving may not be enough. And that's okay too, It just depends on kind of what you want to do. So yes, vendors can create urgency. And I think that I'm glad you brought that up because I even was feeling like, yeah, you better get that photographer.
Yeah.
So,
And I feel like there's a natural order, right? Like a lot
yes.
of us, we had to find a venue first of like, when are
Hmm.
they available? Because that's usually
Right.
what's booked up first, quote unquote. And then, for us, it was okay, I already had a photographer I wanted. And so it's just like, please tell me you're available this day because this is the day we have available for the
Right.
venue. And so, like, once those two things were locked in, then I felt like I had a little bit more breathing room to like figure out catering
Right.
and figure out flowers and cake and all the other things. But like, those two were so important to us as a couple that I felt like I was like hoping and praying they were both available at the same time. And if not, I was gonna have to move one to make them fit. And I know other brides have had to do that.
Yes, yes, and that's okay too, right? Like,
Mhm.
maybe don't get so married to one particular vendor right away. Maybe have 3, like, kind of your top 3, and be okay, like, maybe this is me talking this is how I practice my own little if this doesn't happen, what's the worst thing? Oh, I'll hire my photographer number 2. It's okay,
Mm,
like, setting myself up for those kind of things in my life. That's how I get by.
no,
But
some flexibility. Hmm.
some flexibility and just sitting with it and weighing the worst case scenarios is kind of you're probably like, Mackenzie, do not talk about how to give people advice on things. That's how I operate anyway. So and that helps
No, I'm
me.
sure listeners are appreciative of just all the different viewpoints because I don't think there's one right way to do this, right? Like that's why we have weddings that cost nothing to
Yes.
cost hundreds of thousands of dollars because people's priorities are different.
Yeah.
And so it might be I'm going to spend 2 years planning a wedding because I need to save 2 years worth of
Right.
income for that versus someone who's like, I'm going to elope because I really don't want to put money towards that. I'd rather put it towards a house, right? Like I've heard both ends of
Yep.
that with clients. And so, I think that just circles back to why it's so important to be on the same page with our fiance, our partner, our soon to be betrothed
Yep.
to say, are we good? Are we, do we feel like we're hemorrhaging money? Or do we feel like this is worthwhile? yes, we want this day to be lovely and wonderful for everyone, but we also don't want to be in a lot of debt coming out of it. Like that's not the way to start a marriage, or at least
Right.
that's not the way most of us want to start a marriage.
Right. Right. That
So
makes sense. Well, thank you so much. I really appreciate you joining us on our show today. I know that our listeners are going to get so much great information about that your services even exist, and I'm sure they can find folks in their states and regions that can help them with this if this is something that they're looking for. But tell us where we can find more about you. You have an Instagram handle, your any of the nuggets that our listeners
yeah,
can find more information about you.
I guess more as like just like a human. Instagram is where I show up most human. So at Khara Croswaite is the handle versus like LinkedIn is obviously more professional. Facebook is mostly just friends and colleagues that want to track me. So yeah, Instagram is probably where people can like have a glimpse at my life and all the hats I wear, whether it's professor, financial therapist, mental health therapist, mom. I also have a lot of things on my website, which is crosswaitecounselingplc.com. So that's where like all of the things I do are listed, everything from consultation to financial therapy to helping people create courses and all sorts of fun creative projects. So that's also a place to land.
Oh my goodness, you're amazing. Thank you so much for joining us. We'll actually link all of the things that you mentioned in our show notes. And so our listeners can go check those out. I know I'm going to be dabbling on your site a lot here. And I look forward to connecting with you more on your human Instagram. So, but anyway, thank you so much. I really appreciate you joining us, and we'll talk to you soon.
Thank you.